Work my hours or we'll find someone who will. By user TheBigCahuna43. So there I was, working at a mid-sized firm as a software developer. My team had always been pretty laid back, focusing on results rather than the exact hours we were glued to our desks. Our projects were delivered on time, our clients were happy, and our team morale was high. That is, until we got a new project manager. Let's call him Dave. Dave was fresh from a highly regimented corporate background and had ideas about proper workplace management, which basically meant micromanaging everything. He'd schedule unnecessary daily status meetings, demanded we fill out hourly work logs, and insisted that everyone strictly adhere to 9 to 5 office hours with minimal breaks. One day, during one of his infamous efficiency crackdowns, he sent out an email with a new policy that all coding must be done strictly within office hours to ensure collaboration and supervision. This was ridiculous because creative work like coding often requires flexible hours for maximum productivity.
But Dave was adamant, and he ended his email with, "If you think you can find a loophole, think again, follow the rules, or we'll find someone who will."
Challenge accepted, Dave. I decided to comply. Meticulously. I coded strictly between 9:0 a.m. and 5:0 p.m., not a minute earlier, not a second later, if I encountered a bug or was in the middle of a complex piece of code. Too bad. 5 p.m. means the end no matter what. My team is fed up with being treated like school children, followed my lead. The results were predictable. Projects that usually took a couple of weeks started dragging on. Tasks that we could have completed in days with a bit of overtime took much longer because we couldn't capitalize on the bursts of late afternoon productivity we were used to. Our workflow was severely disrupted, and the quality of our work started to deteriorate. Dave noticed, of course. He had to answer to upper management for the sudden drop in productivity and lack of commitment, which he knew was a result of our dissatisfaction with his new policy. When upper management called for an impromptu Zoom meeting with the entire at 4:30 p.m. to address the ongoing project delays, the entire team logged in to address the ongoing project delays. The entire team logged in to explain our situation. In the meeting, Dave spent half an hour shifting blame and berating individual team members. He didn't even mention the 9-5 policy that had led to the whole situation. As the clock ticked towards 5:0 p.m., the tension in the virtual room was palpable, and our team hatched a plan over text. Right on cue, as the clock struck 5:0 p.m., one of the employees spoke up in compliance with Dave's 9 to 5 rule. "We must log off now." Without missing a beat, every team member clicked leave meeting, leaving a stunned Dave to face the executives alone. This abrupt mass exit highlighted the impracticality of Dave's rigid policy, making it clear to the executives that change was necessary. The incident, quickly dubbed as the 5-0 Zoom exodus, led to another meeting where Dave was publicly admonished and instructed to abolish his strict rules in favor of more flexibility. And as for me and my team, we made sure to celebrate our little victory with a well-deserved happy hour. After 5 p.m., of course. If you have a problem, it better be a 15-minute problem. By user deleted. My husband told me a story yesterday about his act of malicious compliance that happened about a decade ago. In a previous job, he worked 8-4 in an office. Many of his colleagues worked 9-5, so they were still working when he was leaving. When he was about to leave, he'd usually be asked a technical question or asked to quickly glance over something by another member of staff. This was rarely quick and usually had him standing around for a further 10 minutes, which on a regular basis starts to add up. One day, his manager was going over the monthly timesheets and asked my husband why he'd added 10 minutes on 5 days across past month. Bear in mind, flexi time was allowed. My husband explained the situation, referring to the specific problems he was asked to deal with on each of those 5 days. The manager told him that the company only works in 15-minute segments, so he can't put down 10 minutes. It would have to be 15 minutes. However, we can't round it up because that's dishonest, he said. So just bear it in mind for next time. This was in front of the rest of the office. That very same week, my husband signs out of his computer at 4 a.m.
Just before he leaves, the manager asks him to explain some of the particulars in an email he'd received from a contractor. My husband asks, "How long will it take?" The manager replies, "Just 5 minutes."
My husband then says, "Unless it's a 15-minute problem, I'll have to look at it tomorrow." Is it a 15-minute problem? His manager turns red and awkwardly says, "It's not." My husband respectfully states that he will put it at the top of his to-do list the following morning and leaves. One of his colleagues texted him just after 5 and said there was an awkward silence after he'd left, and When the manager eventually got up and left to do something, they all burst out laughing. Edit. Some people were asking about wage theft. He eventually had the 15 minutes added back on after the policy revealed that he could round it up if it was a task that took 7.5 minutes or more and down if it wasn't. The manager seemed genuinely unaware of this when it was raised. He was salaried, so he wasn't concerned about losing income, just about losing flexi time that could have helped him put if something unprecedented happened, like being stuck in traffic one day. I think managers should spend a certain amount of time a week looking over their own policies, or at least find out what they are before making any kind of instruction. If a manager gets me fired, doesn't realize there's a paper trail, by user powdered toast supreme. I worked as a writer and editor for over a decade. In that time, I had my fair share of bad bosses, like anyone. But there is just one that completely takes the cake. I worked for a large media company that had dealings with a number of other companies and subsidiaries ranging from publishing to fashion to sports to tech. You name it, they did it. How a writing department worked was each writer would have specific areas that they would write for, kind of like how journalists have beats they cover. So if you were assigned to the fashion arm of the company or one of its partners' subsidiaries, you wrote or edited everything for that arm. I worked for this company for about a year and a half before a new manager was hired. She was the second in command of our department. Part of her and our department director's job was to update our internal style guide when necessary. For those that don't know, a style guide is a reference document for how to either refer to things or how to format things for the company partners. With 4 or 10 years as manager, this was only done maybe once or twice a year, and the changes were relatively minimal since the style guide was very well established in the company and had been in place for a number of years. After she came on, it was being updated at least once a week, if not multiple times a week. It legitimately became an obsession for her. Aside from the general annoyance of keeping up with it, it didn't take long for me and my coworkers to reach the conclusion that our new manager didn't have the faintest idea what she was doing. Each new version had more and more glaring errors. At first, we all ignored these changes, giving her the benefit of the doubt and hoping, albeit naively, that these new directives were mistakes. That was until people started getting reprimanded for not following the style guide. I was the first to get a one-on-one closed-door talk. One of the departments I wrote for was sports, and she had seen that I had not been following the new rule of how I was to refer to the men's and women's teams I covered. Truthfully, I had willfully ignored it, hoping that it was just a mistake. To my horror, however, it appeared my new writing manager didn't understand basic grammar. You see, the change she implemented removed the apostrophe from men's and women's. So, for example, if I was covering men's basketball, I was to refer to it as men's basketball. Her rationale was that the men didn't own the team. Therefore, it should not be possessive. Apparently, her understanding of the English language didn't evolve past grade school explanations. I was honestly pretty dumbfounded at first. But once I got over the initial shock that the second in command of our department didn't realize men's was not a word, I tried bleakly to explain that men is already plural and that a possessive doesn't always denote direct ownership. Read, men's bathroom. She stared blankly at me for a few seconds, and for the briefest of moments, I thought maybe I was seeing the cogs in her head turn. She, however, doubled down. Realizing the fight was lost, I told her that I would implement the changes going forward. Now, here's where my malicious compliance comes in. We worked for and with some very high-profile companies, and mistakes were not tolerated for things that were outward-facing. Realizing her idiocy could cost me my job, I made a simple request. Could you please email me the exact style guide rule you're referencing and how exactly you'd like me to implement it, with examples of where I messed up? She looked at me like I was stupid for not understanding what was being asked of me, but she still wrote it all down in an email for me. I also made sure any further style changes were referenced in an email and specifically asked that if there were further changes to please cite how I had done them in the past, along with how she would like them to be done from now on. Sure enough, within about 6 months of this, I was fired. And at my exit interview, I handed her a folder containing every written communication regarding the style changes, along with quite a bit of evidence that she was passing off her projects to other members of the dept and changing people's work behind their back. She was fired 3 months after me, along with our department director 3 months after that. Turned out my little folder sparked a full investigation by her, and after interviewing other coworkers in the department, They realized she had done all of it to have grounds to fire people within the department she didn't like. I just happened to be the first on the chopping block. The projects she was passing off to other people, she was taking the credit for what they were doing to make herself look good. Those changes she was making to other people's work. I realized that she was changing things to make it explicitly incorrect. You gotta love software that tracks changes and timestamps and lists the user. On top of all of this, they also discovered that she had, at best, exaggerated, and at worst, fabricated, large swaths of her ism. By the time she was fired, I had already found another job in a different department at the same company. It was a good gig, and my new manager wasn't a complete cunt. Eventually, I moved on from that company, but if anything, my time there taught me a very valuable lesson. Document, and document some more. Edit. To address some questions, things mentioned in the comments, this was 10 years ago in a U.S. state that has laws that basically state a person can be fired for any reason provided that it isn't prejudicial, race, gender, sexual orientation, etc. Writers also aren't exactly top earners. I did well enough to support myself, but legal action would have been difficult to pay for. Not to mention, I was subject to some very strict NAs because of the company clients, partners, subsidiaries I worked for and with. Any legal action would have put me at risk of a countersuit. I was happy that justice was served, and I had a job elsewhere in the company with good pay until I moved on. Edit 2. I can't believe the amount of people in my DMs asking if I'm X for my company. Seriously, how many managers are out there that don't know men's isn't a word? Edit 3. If you are trying to document bad practices at your job, your best bet is honestly your phone. In some cases, it isn't against policy to connect your work email to your phone. So screen grab the shit out of everything that is suspect to you. Do not BT. Do not use zip thumb drives. Basic software these days can track it and could result in your firing regardless. Just take a photo of the computer screen with your phone if that's how it needs to be documented. It might not be pretty and it might look boomer off, but if you're trying to cover your ass, this is the easiest, most accessible way. You want to put how much concrete in your Civic by user path of uncertainty. Many years ago, I worked in a locally run store that sold a bit of everything. I was the low-paid teenager that carried heavy things to people's vehicles. While working one day, I get called over the radio that a customer needed 12 bags of concrete, 8 loads each. I was expecting to see a pickup truck or something similar backed up to our loading area. Instead, I saw a small Honda Civic there waiting for me. Thinking it was a mistake, I asked the driver to relocate momentarily as I had someone coming to pick up multiple bags of concrete. Imagine my surprise when they told me they were the customer I was waiting for. I asked the customer how much they wanted to take in each trip, as I believed a nearly 1,000 load of concrete might be too much for such a small vehicle to handle safely. The customer became aggravated and insisted that they were taking it all at once. I quickly ran this past the store owner to make sure I wouldn't be held liable for any damages. I ran back, apologized to the customer, and began loading the bags. As I loaded everything up, the customer made several quips about how the customer is always right, and that I was too young and naive to understand that vehicles are engineered with a margin of safety. It quickly became apparent that there was no play left in the suspension, but at this point, I just stopped questioning things. I couldn't fit all of the bags in the trunk, so the customer cleared their back seat, and I loaded that up as well. Upon leaving the loading area, you could clearly hear things rubbing. As the car went to exit the parking lot, it passed over the elevation change between the lot and the road. There was a loud pop of something breaking, followed by scraping. I could see that the driver was irate in the car. After a moment, they got out, looked around and under their car. The guy sheepishly asked for my cell phone because his had died and he needed to make a few phone calls. A short time later, a tow truck came to remove the car, and the guy waited in our lot for nearly an hour until his wife could come pick him up at closing time. By user Katalin 493, I was working a closing shift at McDonald's, and at the end of the night, this night in particular, I was in grill. It was getting late and we were slow, so I started minimizing what we had in stock and was going to cook the rest of the food to order for the last half hour of my shift. The closing manager came up to the table to see what I had and told me to fill the trays because we aren't closed yet. I tried to explain to her what I was doing and she didn't listen to a word I said, so I did what she asked. I turned back on the second heated cabinet and told the person I was in grill with to do what she said and fill the trays. He looked at me confused and I told him that she wanted the trays full. She can deal with the waste at the end of the night. So that's what we did. We filled the trays up with food as if it were lunch rush, since that's what she wanted. At the end of the night, I emptied out all the full trays into a bucket and gave it to her with her sheet to fill out with how much waste we had, and she tried to make me count it. I told her, I'm not closing manager. It is your job to count it. Have fun and finish closing down grill. Oh, she was pissed. The next day, my GM asked what had happened, and I told her. All she said was never to do it again. I never worked a closing shift with that manager after that.